Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Bob Mendelsohn, and this is the Bob's Your Uncle podcast. Today we speak with Rob Smith about music and tennis, about cultures and the Beatles. Stay tuned. Thanks for joining me for this, Bob's Your Uncle podcast, Season 1, Episode 25. Of note, the opinions are strictly my own and those of my guests. You can now find us and comment directly to us wherever you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, Spotify, the list goes on. We have a lot of topics to discuss, and even so, on the Bob's Your Uncle podcast, you are part of the show. We want to see and hear you. Send us a message on Facebook or Instagram. In the weeks to come, we'll speak about pickleball again, and next week, country music and wars and rumors of wars. Let's see where the spirit leads us. Whether you're at home, online, on the road with me in your headset, at the gym, or out for your evening constitutional, wherever you get podcasts, that's where we will be. Thanks for being with us for these 18 minutes. Historical Marker of the Week. On this date in history, 16th of August, a king and a queen died, both in music's annals. In 1977, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, died of a drug overdose in Memphis, Tennessee. He was only 42. And in 2018, American singer Aretha Franklin, who defined the golden age of soul music of the 1960s and was known as the Queen of Soul, died at age 76. And that's the historical marker of the week. Rob, you've been a musician your whole life, and pardon the pun, you were instrumental in continuing a Beatles tribute band named the Beatnix. Is that still fun for you as you approach turning 60 in a couple of years?
Bob, it is, and thanks for having me on, by the way. It's great to be talking with you. Well, yes, I've been playing music since, I was very small, and I certainly love the Beatles since I was very small. I probably almost born to the sound of the Beatles, being born in the UK in 1964. So it was kind of no surprise that at a point in my life I joined a Beatles tribute show. It'd been already going for a couple of decades before I joined it, but I've been doing it for now about 17 years and never get sick of it. I never tire of the music.
Yeah, it sounds fun.
Yeah.
In the next 3 episodes on the podcast, I'm interviewing people who are all involved in music. And you've written much and have any number of albums of what might be labeled Christian music. What makes that sound different to hymns that used to be sung in the past?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of continuity, of course, between ancient hymnody and contemporary Christian music, but obviously some differences. I mean, a century or more back, there were some major changes with the development of kind of gospel choruses, and then the structure of contemporary songs is diversified even more, and of course a lot of Christian music now is seeking in, I think, in a good way to make use of contemporary genres so that it not only functions as culturally resonant for God's people, but also has outreach possibilities, missional possibilities that people who don't know the Lord can actually hear Christian music and think, actually, I quite like the sound of this, and therefore be more open to hearing the message. Yeah, even with the guys I play with in the Beatnix, sometimes we've had long drives back from shows out of town, and I've put Christian music on in the car, and sometimes they've said, this is really good stuff. They really like it.
And that's surprising to them.
Yeah, because I think they're expecting Christian music to sound dated and daggy, and when they realise that some of it's actually very well made and very, very well written and produced, and so that, again, that opens a little door. It doesn't, of course, mean they're receptive to the message necessarily, but at least opens that door so that they might actually hear something they otherwise wouldn't hear. So anyway, all through church history, I've done quite a bit of research on this over the years, but there have been mixed reactions to church music, and there have been sort of those who are what I call kind of cautious. Calvin was a cautious one. Luther was much more enthusiastic, and Jonathan Edwards much more enthusiastic, and but even even back in the early church, Athanasius, others, different thoughts running about music and how to use it safely, how to use it well. But fundamentally, it's a gift of God, which obviously can be used for great good and God's glory, but it also can be taken captive by other powers.
The dark forces.
Yeah.
So when you talk about evoking this emotion, I get it. That really, and have you ever been like up at Katoomba and there are 3,000 people singing a cappella, "Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing"? It just fills the person who's singing or being there with a sense of awe and reverence.
Yeah, well, I've had the great privilege over the years of leading the music at the CMS summer school each January, where there is that number of people singing together, and it's a great experience aesthetically, but a greater experience spiritually. So there is beauty in all that God has made, and obviously there can be great beauty in music, even if the intention of the music isn't to honor God. The music itself can still kind of honor God. And I think sometimes what people experience when they hear beautiful music is they get a sense of transcendence, which ought to point them to the Lord and lead them to worship. Doesn't always do that, of course. Sometimes they mistake the creature for the creator, as it were, or the creation for the creator. But certainly for believers, we ought to hear these things and recognize their origin and appreciate them for what they are, but in the end give glory to the one who's given them.
Rob, you grew up in a ministry home. Your dad was a minister. You are. Your wife is a professional author and speaker. Have you seen the world change on your watch in relation to the church and culture? Are we the same? Is it the same as it used to be? Where are the differences?
If I just think back through my own ministry lifetime, which I suppose goes back, over 30 years, certainly the way that culture viewed the church and its ministers has radically changed, dramatically changed. There was a kind of latent respect, I think, when I first entered into ministry. I mean, people weren't obviously necessarily felt warmly about Christianity, but they kind of respected the church as an influence in society and saw ministers by and large as a force for good, even though they recognised there were exceptions and there are some, glitches in the system, so to speak. Whereas now my impression is, and more than impression, is that, the church is viewed as a problematic force in society, and ministers therefore are suspect individuals who are promoting not only strange ideas but possibly dangerous ideas.
Rob, what gives you great pleasure nowadays?
I've recently finished a PhD, so I feel like I've been released from captivity. And going back to the music, I've deliberately not been writing or recording music for a number of years while I've been knocking out the PhD, just because I just knew I needed all my creative energies to be funneled into one thing. So I'm really right at that point where I'm effectively turning the tap back on and hoping the well hasn't run dry, and that there's songs that will come. I've written many songs over the years, and so it's been a strange period of my life to not write songs. So I'm hoping for an outburst of song, but certainly music gives me great joy. All the things in normal life in terms of just reading and walking and watching films and time with my wife and family, and the work God's given me to do is a great joy to me. The lecturing at SMBC and the ministry openings, preaching and other things, all of that is a privilege, all of that is a joy, and so I love it all. I'm grateful for it all.
You and I have spent many hours on tennis courts in years past. Do you still get enough exercise, or are you looking to increase that as time goes on?
Yeah, well, I am looking to increase it, partly because I'm just aware that with each passing year I need to do a little more to stay fit and healthy and trim. I'm hoping we might see you back on the court at some point. We'll see about that. But again, one of my post-PhD goals is to actually put more time into self-care and exercise. And one of my students is married to a personal trainer, and he's offered to help me get back a bit of strength and flexibility that I probably lost in the last few years doing the PhD and sitting down too long and being bunkered down.
You've had some interesting roles as a Christian in Jewish issues and concerns. From your vantage point, do you see any increase in anti-Semitism either here in Australia or even worldwide?
Well, I'm aware of it. I have to admit I'm not on top of all the details and not monitoring as I know some are. And as you and I know, anti-Semitism is the devil that never dies, as it's sometimes called. So it's always lurking somewhere. But there does seem to be a little bit of a resurgence that I'm aware of, and it coming from a variety of quarters. I mean, in one sense, all the usual quarters, but you've got dangers on the extreme right, dangers on the extreme left. You've got the sort of, even again, whether it's Nazi revivalist thought or anti-Zionist Israel sort of positions. You've got anti-Semitism of different stripes, I think.
Rob, is there anything else you want to tell the Bob's Your Uncle podcast audience? Something we've touched on, you wanted to amplify, or just anything else that's burning?
Well, look, I've spent the last 5 years working on this PhD on sex, gender, and transgender issues, which are very, very current, and that's been a great, that particularly the transgender question has been a great source of confusion for many believers, I know. But it's really just one of a nest of challenges that the world is grappling with, and therefore the church is grappling with as well. I do see a tendency for Christians to... There's sort of two secular narratives, right? There's a sort of far right and a far left. And for various reasons, we can be more attracted or more persuaded of one of those views than the other. And I think just to be sensitive to the fact that the Lord and Scripture are often singing a different song. It's not the song of the right, nor is it the song of the left. It's a bit like that scene in the episode in Judges where I think it's Joshua says the angel of the Lord or something. Are you for us or our enemies? And the answer is no. It's like I'm not playing that.
Wrong question.
Wrong question. And it's a bit like that. A friend of mine talks about the way in which the gospel diagonalizes the worldly options and says either sometimes both and, but sometimes neither nor. And so I think we've got to be just listening carefully, looking carefully to see is there not only just a third way, conceptually, but a more biblical way of reacting to some of these movements and challenges, so that we don't just play the culture war game that the secular world plays. Now, there is a place for Christians to engage in the culture war, but to sort of just buy into the secular forms of that, I think just only increases the polarization and the tension and the name calling. And actually, I think the Lord has a different way that we need to be seeking out.
Rob, are there more albums in your future?
Solo albums, yeah. Well, a lot of my solo albums have been not explicitly Christian, so I've put a number of just pop records out.
Penelope, come on.
Yeah. Well, have you heard that one?
I've got all your albums.
You've got all my albums.
I just don't know how many there are.
Oh well, there are at least 3 solo pop albums, and then there's a number of Christian solo or duo. Nikki Chisholm and I did a couple of albums together, and so there's probably maybe 7 or 8 albums that kind of are Rob Smith or Rob Smith and someone else. But then there's all the EMU music stuff where I'm contributing 3 or 4 songs to an album of 12, and there's probably about 20 of those. So.
Rob, I really appreciate your time. We've been mates for decades, and it's a joy. We first met on the tennis court, and I've been overlapping. When this episode comes out, which will be on Tuesday, I'm going to be at SMBC speaking.
Ah, excellent.
And so I will promo that the Reverend Smith and I are available on Bob's Your Uncle podcast to the students.
Very good.
No, it's a joy. And so I wish you God's blessing. Claire, your family. I just want you to keep being the success you are by keeping your eyes on the one who has succeeded for us all. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Bob.
Each week we read from the number one bestseller of all time, the Bible. And this week is no exception. From 1 Chronicles chapter 15 we read this. Then King David spoke to the chiefs of the Levites to appoint their relatives, the singers, with instruments of music, harps, lyres, loud-sounding cymbals to raise sounds of joy. Amanda McGinnis is both my travel agent and the sponsor of this podcast, and it will help all three of us. If you book your next trip with her, including hotel and flights and all things tourist. How to reach her? Use the URL shortener bit.ly and you will get to her phone and her email, so type it into your browser, bit.ly/Amanda365. And you'll find her photo and her information at travelpartners.com.au. Contact her directly for tours and flights, for cruises and deals. I've used her for years. She'll give you very good advice. Now, back to the podcast. What do you think about all this? Write me on bobmendo@aol.com or comment or even video to me on Instagram or Twitter at BobsYourUnclePC. I'd love to know what you think about all this. Don't forget to post a review on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you're listening, and share our podcast with your mates, your friends, everyone. Thanks for helping us get known out there. And please follow or subscribe to the podcast and hit like as well. We can use all the good speak we can get. Your podcast app should notify you of the next episode. Don't forget to book all your travel needs with Amanda McGinnis at travelpartners.com.au. Next week, you will meet Charlie Woods. That's Charlotte to her school teachers, and Charlie lives in Nashville, Tennessee. She's a country and contemporary Christian musician and singer with a weekly podcast and with an Instagram following as well. She is a joy to be with, and you won't want to miss our interview on the 23rd. Until then, from me, Bob Mendelsohn, when things seem bleak or uncertain, look up to God. He's in his heaven. And Bob's your uncle. Shalom from Sydney.